Every couple has, we call them sensitive topics, potential issues, conflict, okay? And it's not to say you're doomed if you don't navigate this. It's more to bring awareness.
This is episode number 583 with Casey and Meygan Caston. We're going to be talking about the power of premarital counseling in shaping lasting relationships. I love this topic because I think more people should go for premarital counseling, whether you're even not living together and not planning on marriage. Having counseling to help your relationship is so important. So I can't wait to get into it with Casey and Meygan. But before I do, I just want to welcome you back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you in your journey to lasting love, I've written 2 books. The first is called Becoming a Woman of Value: How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this book is for all parts of relationship with yourself, with others. It takes you sorry, I can't talk today. It takes you through 30 steps and exercises to help you increase your core confidence, to learn how to show up and be aligned in all parts of your life. And the second book is called Choice Points in Dating. And this book I wrote because so many people told me, I don't feel like I have a choice. I feel like I was born this way, or I've had these patterns in the past, and I will always be this way. And that is not true. There are steps you can take to change the trajectory of your relationship, and that's why I wrote this book. You can find them both on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. And we always share a tip from the Woman of Value book. This week's tip is step number 22. Communicate clearly and graciously. Communication skills are a huge part of the work that I do with clients. And the reason is because so many of us are terrible at it, and we don't have the skills to communicate our feelings, our needs, to be able to do it with kindness and grace. And that's why I am such a huge advocate for learning these skills, because that helps our relationships, both with ourselves, with our romantic relationships, with our children, with all people in our lives. And so my challenge to you this week is to just take a moment to identify what's going on for you before you speak. Because if you take that pause and really figure out what is the feeling, what is the need, you'll be able to communicate so much more clearly and kindly. And before I bring my guests on, I just want to invite you, if you're not yet a member, to join Your Last First Date. It is my Facebook group. It is for women over 40 who are looking for a positive place of support, which is so rare these days in communities. And community is so important. And that's why I created this group. We have amazing monitors who keep this group safe along with me. And you get firsthand videos and podcast episodes. Everything comes out there. And it's a great place to learn and grow. So join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guests. In 2013, Casey and Meygan Caston founded Marriage 365. After their own marriage struggles, their aim was to strengthen other people's marriages. They are the authors of 4 books about building connections, and they have also developed online courses. In 2020, Marriage 365 revamped its platform, and they grew to 10,000 members in 1.5 years, which inspired them to also develop a mobile app to enhance their users' experience. Welcome to the podcast, Meygan and Casey.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy.
Before we get into premarital counseling, can you share a little bit about your story? Because you mentioned in the bio that you had some struggles of your own that have kind of led you to create this company.
Yeah. So just like the average person, we met, we fell in love. We thought, this is amazing. Let's do this forever. We chose to get married. And within a couple months, things began to unravel really quickly. We had a lot of expectations. We had a lot of childhood and emotional baggage that we brought into our marriage we didn't even know existed. We had little to no communication tools. And so things went from bad to worse. And by year 3, we were heading towards divorce. And just like you are an advocate for self-awareness and counseling and just really looking at yourself, my best friend at the time said, before you choose to divorce your husband, that's a really big decision. Maybe you should go talk to someone about that. Why don't you go see a therapist? So I saw this therapist and she said to me this: if you want to make a better marriage, it starts by making a better you. And wow, my entire brain and thought process shifted, because at that point I had only blamed Casey. Well, we're at this place in our marriage because of him. It's his fault. If he didn't do this, well, then I wouldn't do this. Right. And she just said, hey, listen, I can work with you, whether or not your marriage is saved or not. Don't you want to be the healthiest version of yourself? And that really was the inspiration for me to just stop focusing on what he was doing and what he wasn't doing. He wouldn't go to therapy with me. So as a lot of men are very, hesitant and avoidant about therapy. And so for 13 months, I worked on myself. I changed everything, Sandy. I set up boundaries. I learned how to communicate. I forgave him. I apologized for being controlling. I learned just a lot of tools in my tool belt. And all that to say, about 13 months later, Casey noticed the change in me and said, I want what you want. We got to rebuild. We rebuild this marriage, and we started rebuilding.
Yeah. And it was, I remember Meygan begging me, and I was filled with there's a lot of pride. Like, I don't need help. Shouldn't love just be easy and natural? Like, if it was meant to be, it shouldn't be this hard. Love is all you need. I mean, I believed every single myth out there about what does it take to sustain lasting love. Like, we just don't need that kind of help at that time. But when I started seeing Meygan change, when we used to get into fights, both of us were very competitive. So, it was who could last the longest was the name of the game. And, it was a debate on who would win. Well, when Meygan started getting healthier and started setting healthier boundaries with me in communication, like, it became really obvious that I was becoming the more toxic spouse. And yeah, it took some time. I'm kind of hard-headed that way. But I saw that change, and I wanted that sense of confidence, that sense of joy, that settledness that Meygan had. So that's really what started that healing journey. And of course, no marriage recovers overnight. It took years for us to kind of restore that connection, learn communication skills, try those communication skills, reiterate on those communication skills, like, keep going after it. And there was a ghoul pool about when Meygan and I were going to get divorced. And so when we started like laughing, we're affectionate with each other, I think a lot of people were like, what's going on here? Like, we thought you guys were, on the death spiral. And that's when we started sharing our story. And the reflection that we got back from other people was like, wow, that's actually really powerful. Like, there's probably other people that need to hear that. And then that's when we started taking our story online, and then one follower became thousands, and here we are today.
A couple of things I love about your story. First of all, that not every couple goes together to therapy right away, and healing one partner has an effect on the other partner. I think people don't realize it. I often work only with one part of a couple, and it changes the relationship. So it can't help but change the relationship when you stop giving energy to the fights, when you stop engaging in that kind of combat. It influenced Casey. Casey realized on his own, because trying to push somebody and force somebody is one of the worst things you could do. And it takes time. I want to highlight that too, that this is not something that we can change overnight, because it took a really long time to get here. It took decades for us to form these beliefs and these ways of being. And so I just love that you tell your story, that you are an example of the work that you do.
Thank you.
But let's talk a little bit about the topic, premarital counseling, and tell us a little bit about what it is and how it works.
All right. Well, I think there's actually a lot of different versions of premarital counseling. I mean, there's some that are given at a church. I know, like the Catholic Church, they have a priest that if you want to get married in the Catholic Church, you have to go through a certain, level of classes to get married by the priest. There are online courses. And of course, then there are people like us where we are coaches, and there's licensed and marriage and family therapists who do them. But I think the nuts and bolts of it is that you're meeting with someone, or for example, for Casey and I, we do it together. So it's a husband and wife you're meeting with, that really wants to see you succeed and wants to make sure and equip you as you go into marriage, or as you choose to say, we're going to spend our lives together. I don't think this existed 100 years ago. We've done some research. I think this is definitely something we've seen more and more of. And there was such a stigma for so long about what is premarital counseling, and isn't that for couples in crisis? But now people are starting to understand, oh no, it's for everybody, anybody, like you mentioned earlier, that wants to have the healthiest relationship possible.
About 10 plus years ago, I started officiating weddings, and that put me in direct contact with couples that were preparing for marriage. And to date, I've officiated well over 1,000 weddings, and I got to tell you, it is one of the greatest joys. First of all, in our line of work, we get to deal with people that don't like each other and are trying to work to find connection. So, someone that's preparing for marriage, they're happy together. So it's fun to be with people like that. And it really kind of put me in direct, like, all so frequent conversations with people that are getting ready for marriage. And then when you start asking them about what's their plan, you start to realize, like, the need for premarital counseling, because we're assuming that people actually are being raised with healthy relationship skills, right? We feel like, everyone should just know exactly how to communicate their feelings in a healthy way and not get wigged out when conflict happens. But I think the statistic shows that over 70% of millennials have been raised in non-traditional family settings, which means this is blended families, single parent homes, or divorced homes, which means that there's key pieces that are missing. There's been separation, right? There's broken parts. There's fear of relationship conflict. There's a lot of avoiders now. So premarital counseling is so necessary, because it's going to teach you those basic skills and make sure that there's like this baseline, like, okay, so do we know how to communicate these hard topics and set the right expectations about, this isn't, the continuing saga of a rom-com going into marriage. This is like real life. There's the mundane parts of life that we all have to deal with. And it's not just the fantasy suite on The Bachelor every single night. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that was my assumption, was sex was going to be every single day, that any sexual urge came and Meygan was just going to be there ready to go.
Sorry, babe. So sorry, babe. That wasn't the case.
that we wouldn't have to deal with conflict, because when we were dating, it was so easy. So that's why for me, premarital counseling would have saved us a lot of heartache.
So many people have the fantasies and also the expectations, that true love doesn't have conflict. And if we loved each other, we wouldn't yell at each other. I mean, if you loved me, you'd accept me exactly as I am. I mean, that's one of my favorites. Like, I don't need to ever change anything because I'm perfect. And if you don't love this, then leave, which is what a lot of couples do. But so give us a little more context around what is premarital counseling? Like, how do you talked about communication, boundary skills, real life expectations. So walk us through. A couple comes to you. What are you asking them? What are you teaching them?
Yeah. So one of the first things that we do is we talk about any future potential issues. So like you said, you should like me for who I am. And this is just who we're going to be in 40 years from now. Hopefully we're not the same as we were, because I got married at 20. I'm very different than at, age 40 than I was at age 20. So every couple has, we call them sensitive topics, potential issues, conflict. Okay. And it's not to say you're doomed if you don't navigate this. It's more to bring awareness. So let me give you an example. When Casey and I were dating, his father and him were very close, and he's an only child, and his father had stepped over several boundaries when we were dating. and even engaged. And looking back, I would have loved if we talked about what is our relationship going to look like with your father once we get married. And so we didn't talk about that. And we've been married for over 20 years. And I would say for about 10 years, one of our biggest issues has been his dad, my father-in-law. And there's been a lot of healing and reconciliation now, which has been amazing, but it has caused so much stress. And it's not even about Casey and I. It's about my father-in-law. Like, it's an external factor. And so that's an example of something that you'll get in premarital counseling is a counselor asking questions about family and money and values and childhood and things like that, that if there's been stress, if there's been conflict, if someone's not speaking up in the relationship, they're like, I'm a little nervous or anxious about that. This is the time to talk about it in a safe place. And let's just talk openly and see where both people are, because that was, again, not talked about. And so we really like to hone in and spend a lot of time on future potential issues. And we go through all the different areas in that. Also, another thing is, for us, we go through 6 core topics with every single couple. And so communication evidently is key to so many things. Communication, how you talk to each other, how you listen with empathy. And we want to teach them actual communication skills. We go through conflict and repair. Okay, so you're going to fight. You're 2 different people. It's going to happen if it hasn't happened yet. And you're not always going to be like, oh, so quick to forgive and let's just move forward. Like, one of you or both of you is going to want to hold a grudge, or you may build resentment, or there might be some deep hurt and you didn't even mean it. How do you actually repair that? And then the other thing we look at is family of origin. Again, going back to childhood, any trauma is so important to discuss. We don't want to ever just neglect that there was trauma. One of the things we always say, kind of a red flag to pay attention to, is if you're dating someone and they're like, oh, it happened a long time ago, but it's fine now. And they don't ever want to talk about it, because it can come out later in life in very odd ways, very unhealthy ways. And so we want to make sure that someone who went through any kind of sexual trauma, abuse, even like something like a cancer diagnosis, a serious car accident, it can impact you. And so family of origin, again, family of origin would be like my father-in-law too, even present day. What are the boundaries with our family? What's family life going to look like with your extended family, my extended family? We always talk about money, finances, right? Is it going to be your bank account and mine? Are we going to conjoin? Are we going to have a prenup? What's motivating for you with money? What does money mean to you? And then the big topic, of course, is sex and intimacy, because so many people have such an incredible sex life when they're dating and engaged, and it changes with the mundane, the kids, the chores, the just being an adult, responsible with age, menopause, all of that factors in. Just having those open-ended questions. And last but not least, self-discovery, which sounds like your value, Sandy, is like ours, that if you want to make a better marriage, make a better you, let's learn about each other. The good, the bad, the ugly, your strengths, your weaknesses. For example, Casey, he's a more of a late person. I'm an on-time person. Guess what? This impacts us on almost a daily basis being married. And so just talking about all those 6 core categories and really leaning in and not shying away from the hard topics is what we focus on in premarital counseling.
Our daughter's learning how to drive. And, there's a lot of education that goes into prepping a young driver. They make them take tests. They do driver's ed. They do an online course, and all like hours of preparation in order to hand over a little plastic card that gives them license to take a vehicle 70 miles an hour down the road while not harming anybody. I mean, think about the responsibility that we give to our 16-year-olds. And yet we walk into marriage so cavalier with no prep. The only way to prepare for marriage is marriage. So why wouldn't you listen to other married couples to say, hey, here's some things that you should be talking about before getting married? And yet we just kind of treat love as so, it's just, hey, we fell in love. Like, this is so easy. And marriage is hard. Marriage is work. And I think I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but I think we live in a society right now where we celebrate our individual rights and freedoms It's my right. It's my freedom. It's my dreams. There's like all this I in those statements. And then we try to like form a team. So it's like people want all the rights and all the privileges, I should say, of being married while retaining the rights of being independent. And what's happening is we're seeing that that's not working in marriage. So premarital is kind of level sets expectations, kind of points people in the right direction.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last-first-date to learn more and claim this offer. We definitely live in a society where people have fought hard to be independent, and especially people in my age demographic who have been single for a long time, who don't know how to be a part of a couple. You know, this is an issue where people are very set in their ways and they're coming in saying, well, I want it this way, and I only want somebody who's got this list of character traits that have nothing to do with compatibility at all. And but I want to also talk about some of these topics that you brought up. I think they're all super important. And you brought up your father-in-law, and this was an issue for me in my marriage. It's one of the things that actually led to my divorce, was that it wasn't it. So in-laws can be annoying. I mean, they can be controlling. They can be territorial. They can do a lot of things that are annoying. I think what I learned and what was really hurtful to me was that my ex-husband didn't know how to prioritize me in the relationship. So, you know, you can have a nosy in-law. You can have somebody who has zero boundaries, who's critical, who comes in and does things that are really destructive to the relationship. But if your spouse or partner advocates for you, who you are part of a family structure that is more important at this point. It is more important, in my opinion, to advocate for your spouse than to go back to the mom. In my case, it was a mother-in-law who, anytime we had anything go wrong in our relationship, she would basically put me down and say, oh, honey, come back to mommy. And
Oh,
it
wow.
takes, yeah. So these kinds
That's
of
hard.
things happen, really, really challenging, and made me feel unwanted and unimportant. And when my oldest daughter got married, I learned from that experience. I mean, I would never have been that way to begin with, but I was very clear with my daughter and my son-in-law, this is the kind of mother-in-law I will be. This is the kind of grandmother I will be, because these things have to be stated. You know, I think that, you know, to tell my daughter, when you two have issues, I am not going to take sides. If you want to run something past me and get some feedback and get some skills around it, learn how to communicate better with your husband, that's fine. But I'm not going to say your husband's an idiot for doing what he did. And the same thing comes to being a grandmother to 3 beautiful grandchildren. I was clear that I work full time, that I will be there for them, that I will show my love in these ways, but I'm not going to be the person who quits my job and becomes a full-time babysitter. That's not me. But I think if more people talked about these things early on, we'd have many less problems.
Agreed. I think, Sandy, what you hit the nail on the head by, there's a lot of assumptions made. So when you're dating, it's assumed, well, we're looking out for the best of each other. Of course, we're going to have boundaries with your mother-in-law. Of course, we're going to expect X, Y, and Z. And the thing is that's what the goal of premarital counseling is, to have these really open conversations about all these sorts of topics based on the couple's needs, but also on the counselor really guiding this couple to say, we want to make sure we touch on this and not make any false assumptions, that you two are creating your own new family unit. Like you said, it's your new family unit, and you get to make your own rules and your own traditions. And those are great things, and you should celebrate that. And just because your mom and dad did it a certain way doesn't actually mean that you have to, as a new couple, do it that certain way. And I think just there's a lot of assumptions made with couples. And so, of course, again, we get them on the aftermath of, well, it was assumed that we would have a boundary with the holidays and our extended family. And now we're fighting every holiday season about it. And so having those conversations is so vitally important.
I want to just say that I think that a lot of times people have no idea these things will become issues because they haven't yet experienced them. So how do you get people to kind of understand that this could be a hot topic, or, is there a kind of questioning that you have that will help bring some of these things to light?
Well, a lot of what we share is honestly, because we've gone through so much, we do share personally and we give examples.
Mhm.
And that's what Casey and I do. I think that it's just real life on real life. And so we'll bring up the father-in-law and we'll say, hey, we're going to talk about in-laws. And they'll both say, oh, they're great. And we love family. Everything's cheery and great. And we'll say, okay, for us, we felt the same way getting married. And then this is what happened to us. Is there a potential that this could happen? And that usually opens the door to a couple or one of the partners going, okay, I haven't really said anything, but yeah, I'm a little fearful of this. I don't know, Casey, if you want to add anything to that, but I do feel like we share personal, and that opens the doors for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think that in a conversation that's shrouded with a lot of shame about getting help, nobody really wants to get help for their relationship. They want to be the, I can do this on my own. So when you lead with vulnerability and you do storytelling, what we've realized is when you hear somebody else's story, it gives us a starting point for us to explore our own story, right? And that's why stories inspire us. Like, here's somebody that looks like me or has the same background as me, and look at all that they've accomplished. Well, that's because we kind of overlay our story into their story. And so even kind of with that being completely honest and vulnerable about the struggles we went through, and some really, really embarrassing stories. By the way, there's some stories out there that, like, when we were going through it, I'm like, oh my God, that story is never going to see the light of day. And then what happens is there's a moment of courage where we'll share that story and we'll be like, oh, I hope people are going to unfollow us now, or people are going to think less of us now. And it's those stories that are even more humiliating that actually get more response. Like, oh my gosh, I went through something like that too. And I never wanted to share that, but you gave me courage to do that. So all that to say, going back to the family of origin, I think what happens is when we share our story, people start to understand, wow. Now I'm going to say this too. Everybody that punches out of their house, that's their norm. They just think this is normal. My parents yelling and screaming at each other, or my parents never argued in front of me, right? And so just having conversations and being able to have like a third set of eyes to say, hey, so that's not normal, or hey, here's how this potentially could go down in your relationship. This husband, his dad was never emotional, so this is going to be something that you're going to have to understand when you get married. Maybe he's not going to be as emotional as you want, right? So bringing awareness of that is really the first step.
Yeah. And how we bring awareness is we actually wrote a book called 365 Connecting Questions for Engaged Couples. And what we have them do is we have them go through the questions on their own. They're open-ended questions, meaning there's not a yes or a no response. It's supposed to open up more dialogue. And then what we say is, as you go through the questions in our next session, please circle or write down the ones that you either have questions on, or that there was potential conflict in, or that you actually didn't argue about, or you don't believe your partner, their response or whatnot. Or if your response was, I actually don't know. Well, we need to explore those areas. And so through our book is how we pick and prod, but have the couples do it on their own. And then we work on where did they get stuck.
That's really effective. And, to your point, Casey, I think that our vulnerability, our willingness to share gives other people permission to share their story and to feel seen. And so many people want to appear perfect, especially on social media. Well, my life is perfect, everything's together. Or we get the opposite, where it's like, oh my God, I'm crying online. Both of those extremes don't work really well. But the ability to say, hey, I get you. I've been through some really hard times too. And look where we are today. And here's how we got there. It didn't happen because of luck. And that's where I think a lot of people just say, well, some people just have luck. And I think also to your point about your family of origin, a lot of times we don't even know what normal looks like. So we may recognize, like I knew that my parents yelling and getting divorced and all of their putting each other down was not okay. I begged my parents to get divorced, actually, but I didn't know what healthy looked like because I didn't see it. But I also always gravitated towards families of friends of mine where it was calm and where people seemed loving. And so there's a sense that we have, and we can be pulled towards something, but we still don't know, like, how do we do it? How do we navigate these difficult times? And what do we do instead of yelling? How do we actually work on our ego? How do we stop and pause and figure out what it is that's really going on and not just walk around blaming and shaming and judging and, oh my God. Let's talk about some success stories. If you can share an example, because we're talking about stories here, if you could share an example of a couple or two that highlights some of the impact of all this amazing counseling.
We got a good one.
Yeah, there was a sweet couple that we worked with years ago. And funny enough, not to make this all about family, but their biggest issue was the husband's, or I should say the fiance's family. It just really unhealthy people, very hurtful, very damaging, kind of those obvious behaviors, very passive aggressive comments. And we kind of had to meet with them to say, listen, you guys are really healthy other than this one area in your marriage or in your relationship. And what would it look like if you had boundaries? And so we taught them boundaries, right? Boundaries is about prioritizing and protecting. First, prioritizing protecting you and your own mental health and relational health and physical health. But also now, as you two come together, you want to create boundaries. And it starts now. It doesn't start when you get married after you say, I do. Like, you guys are engaged. This should start now. And so we walked them through probably the hardest thing that they've been through, but they ended up not inviting certain family members of his to their wedding. They were terrified that it was going to ruin their wedding day. And Casey officiated their wedding. I got to go and be a guest. It was beautiful. And they were so grateful that they made that difficult decision because they were able just to enjoy their wedding. And they are happily married 7 years later, and they still have very clear and healthy boundaries with his family. There's been some reconciliation and finally some family members going, okay, they're not going to allow and tolerate this behavior anymore. And they've just made themselves like, this is what matters most, is us two and our new family unit. And so we're really proud of them. But one other quick story. We had a couple that met with 2 premarital counselors before us, and both of them said, you're doomed. You're doomed. You shouldn't get married. And we instantly were like, whoa, like, how long did they meet with you? Oh, just one session. They told you that in one session. Okay, so let's meet with you for a couple sessions. We met with them. We did not feel like they were doomed at all. There was definitely some communication issues. And so what we did is we spent 4 or maybe 5 sessions, and we just taught them true communication skills like you would learn with coaching or therapy, like tools in their toolbox. And the I feel when I need statements and things like that, right? And they are happily married 10 years later. And it was just, I don't know if the counselors didn't want to work with them on communication, but it was just so beautiful to see. And they said, they've got 2 little kids now, and they're just like, we just didn't realize we both had horrible examples of communication growing up, and we just needed some tools.
Wow. Those are wonderful stories.
It's been cool for Meygan and I to both work directly with couples, but one of the things that we saw a need in society was we need more people to get good tools, content like this out there. And it's not scalable if we only met with these couples. So, back in 2015, We created Happily Ever After, which is an online premarital course, one of the first of its kind. It actually walks couples through those like 6 pillars of that Meygan mentioned earlier. And it's been really, really cool to hear stories from people that, we didn't really directly interact with, but that have taken our course and felt like this was really equipping. I now have content and information that can help me navigate my new marriage. And so I think it's cool to be able to work individually, but also to see that grow beyond that too.
I think that when you do good work, it radiates out into so many different areas. People access it for free. They access it for, in a course that they take and never face you, and they access it one-on-one, face-to-face. And I mean, even my Facebook group, which is free and has about 4,000 women, people's lives have changed because I've created boundaries and guidelines that keep the group safe. And if they don't abide by those guidelines, they're out. And because of that, they've learned to be kinder. They've learned how to express themselves differently. They've learned how to support each other in ways that they never knew how. And that radiates out into other parts of their lives. I also wanted to say that the couple who said that they were who were told they were doomed by other counselors, the fact that they kept seeking out counseling says something about them, because a couple who doesn't care is not going to keep trying to find somebody who will actually support them. So thank goodness you guys were there and you were able to show them that it's not about the first surface meeting of a couple, but that there is deeper issues. I mean, it really kills me how many people are told really harmful things by helping professionals. And I've had people come to me with crazy stories. I mean, this one woman said she was told that the only way she's going to attract a man is if she grows her hair longer and wears more revealing outfits with her cleavage showing. And I'm like, that is really bad advice, but I'm glad you came to me. Anyway.
Wow, I don't think I've ever heard that. And we've heard quite a lot of stories. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I would say too, trust your gut, right? If you meet with someone one time and you didn't feel safe, you felt judged, they made a comment that just it doesn't mean that they're a bad counselor necessarily, though that one kind of sounds like a bad because that's all about outward appearance. And that is so not what matters for 80% of the relationship. It's the character. It's who you are as a human, right? The only attraction only takes you so far. But yeah, I trust your gut too. I mean, you want to mesh well with the counselor. And I think that's really important. You want to feel safe. You want to be able to say, I have the hard question and I want to be able to ask it and hopefully find a resolve.
Yeah, it's really important. I'm going to ask you the final question that I ask everyone who comes on my podcast. What are your words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
I'm excited you're asking this question for so many reasons, because I think it's a phenomenal question. And anyone that's listening is so fortunate to be a listener of your podcast, because the advice given is so of quality. And I would tell you, and I'm sure Casey, you would agree with me, is when you're looking for a healthy mate, the number one quality we see is someone who has a growth mindset. If they want to improve and grow and heal and are willing to do that, and they know that they're not perfect, but they're an evolving person who's could be better than they were yesterday, I believe that that is such an attractive quality in anyone. And I think that, of course, that starts with you. If you have that, and we say the 2 words that you want to look for is humility and hunger. Humility of, I'm not perfect. I could be better at X, Y, and Z. Maybe my perspective is off. The humble people do really well dating and in marriage. The hunger comes from the quote of, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. I begged and tried to force Casey to go to therapy. He wouldn't. It really has to come from the person. It can't come from you. You don't want to be in a relationship where they're having to beg to watch this video or beg to listen to this podcast or, bribe them or withhold love. I mean, I tried every unhealthy tactic in the book. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't work. You want to be with someone who's hungry to learn and to be better and to be healthier and to apologize and to forgive and all the things that it takes with relationships. We see that if they have that growth mindset, you may just have your last first date.
That is the number one advice. Both Meygan and I agree on that. Just that you find someone who is constantly evolving, changing, growing themselves. That hungry and humble is one of those key features. In fact, when we're dealing with couples in crisis, we actually don't meet with couples who don't exhibit those two qualities, because those are essential. You can go through anything as a couple, and as long as you are humble to recognize, I have some shortcomings, I can take ownership of my mistakes, I'm humble enough to have an honest look at myself, but I'm also hungry. Like I want to become the best version of myself. And that's something that, I mean, when we look at the tools that we've created at Marriage 365, yeah, it's marriage tools, but it's actually focused on self. Like when you watch our videos, you could watch our videos by yourself, because our idea is like, Casey and Meygan didn't show up at the counselor office on the same day. It took 13 months for Casey to show up. So what could Meygan do? So those tools are really like to say, yeah, if you want to become the healthiest version of yourself, like if you want to make a better date mate, make a better you. If you want to make a better marriage, make a better you. It's all about self-mastery. And so I think that if you want to date for your last first date, like you really need to be aware of, how is this person working on themselves? How are they becoming really, really the healthiest version of themselves?
I could not agree more. That growth mindset is top of the list. You can't build on a foundation if you don't have those two qualities. And my sister recently got remarried, and the two things that I said to her were, he's willing to accept feedback and he's willing to grow with you and he's open, right? And I said, whatever else is there and what other things that you're going to have to overcome, if he's got those two qualities, to me, that's like above and beyond anyone else you've ever dated.
You know what I love about that, Sandy, is that someone listening, they might say like, wow, the person I'm dating or the person I'm interested in isn't a great communicator. It won't work out. No, that's not true. If they're willing and open to learn how to be a great communicator, we always tell anybody can learn how to be a good communicator.
Yeah.
It's the same with, boundaries, work, money management. If you have a desire, a willingness, an openness to learn how to be better in those things and have a healthy balance in life, you can actually have those things. And that's what you want to look for in a mate.
Yeah. And so many people do come to relationships thinking, well, I've done all this work and they haven't. And so I'm only looking for somebody who's done the level of work that I've done on myself. And I tell women this all the time, just look for somebody who's open, who's willing, who is on a growth trajectory in some way. This is a person who reads, who's interested in self-growth. They don't have to have it all together. None of us are perfect, but they have to have those two basic things. Tell us how to find you guys.
For all of our premarital resources, go to happilyeverafter.org and you'll see our course, our coaching, and our book. And of course, you could also visit marriage365.com if you're married and listening.
Okay.
And of course, you can find us all over social media too.
At Marriage 365.
Correct.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has just been a really inspirational conversation. I love that you're open and honest, and you have done the work so that you can help other people to improve their marriages. And we have such a deficit of healthy relationships that the work you're doing is just incredibly valuable. And I appreciate you.
Thank you, Sandy. And it's mutual. We appreciate what you're doing too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.